Hi boys and girls. This week we're going to continue to study biographies, the story of people's lives. But first, let's look at our spelling words for the week. This week we're dealing with O words, okay? We have O-R, which makes the OR sound. And we have porch, scorch, and horn. We have O-A, which makes a long O sound. Moan, float, cloak. We have O consonant E, which also makes the long O sound, choke, phone, globe. And we have O-R-E, which makes an OR sound, score, shore, chore. Okay, so listen again. O-R is porch, scorch, horn. O-A, moan, float, cloak. O consonant E, choke, phone, globe, and O-R-E, score, shore, chore. Better make sure you're studying these this week. All right, we're gonna start with two vocabulary words. The first one, biography. That's a repeat from last week. But remember that a biography is the true story of a person's life, okay? It is nonfiction, and it's a story about somebody that really lived. The next word is emancipate. And emancipate means to set free, and it's going to become a really big word in the story that we read this week. But again, emancipate means to set free. We're going to start by reading Abraham Lincoln by Augustus Stevenson. Now, Abraham Lincoln was the 16th president of the United States. But you probably don't know a lot about him. So I'm going to read this book out of order. I'm going to read the last chapter first so that you kind of know why we're reading this book in the first place. President of the United States. It was November 1860. Bells rang, whistles blew, people shouted. Men hugged each other and threw their hats into the air. Abe Lincoln has been elected, they cried. Abe Lincoln will be our new president. Abe was proud that he had been chosen to become president of the United States, but he was humble too. He knew that there was much hard work ahead of him. He was used to working hard, and he was determined to do the best job he possibly could as president. Mrs. Lincoln and the Lincoln boys, Robert, Willie, and Tad, were proud and pleased too. They were eager to move to Washington. They had several months to get ready because Mr. Lincoln would not become president until early in March of the next year. On February 11th, 1861, a special train left Springfield for Washington. The Lincoln family and other important people were on the train. And it shows a picture of the train, and we have right here, this is Abraham Lincoln, and I'm sure he addressed the people that were all standing watching before the train pulled out. Traveling in a special train was an exciting experience for the boys. Along the way, crowds gathered to watch the train go by. Whenever the train stopped at a city or town, more crowds gathered. At most of these places, Mr. Lincoln made a short speech. Between stops, he planned what he would say at other cities. Before he left Springfield, he had written a special speech that he was going to give in Washington. He carried a copy of the speech with him in a carpet bag. Carpet bag's an old-fashioned type of suitcase. The Washington speech was the most important of all the speeches he was to make. He wanted it to be just right. When he had a little time on the train, he would get the speech out of the carpet bag and go over it again. So he's working very hard on these speeches, and he's giving lots along the way, so we know he's very important. It's a big deal that he had become president because this was before TV, this is before phones, and so this is the only way that people could get to hear what he say. They actually had to listen to him, and they would write it up and put it in newspapers. One afternoon, when he was working on his speech, Willie and Tad became very restless and noisy. At last, Mrs. Lincoln said, "Boys, I wish you would be more quiet. Your father is trying to finish his Washington speech." Willie sat down beside his mother at once. "Do you mean the speech he will make at his inauguration?" He said the long word carefully. Ever since Mr. Lincoln had explained that he would not be president until after his inauguration, Willie and Tad had tried to use the word. They thought it had a fine sound. "Yes," Mrs. Lincoln nodded, "that's the one. Many people are waiting to hear what your father will say in that speech. And the inauguration is when the president is actually sworn in. So that's when he goes from being a citizen and becomes the president, okay? So right now he's the president-elect. Mr. Lincoln stopped working on his speech and put it back in his carpet bag. Well, well, he said, is anybody ready to do a little wrestling? I am, Willie and Tad shouted. Oh, Abe, Mrs. Lincoln said, you're tired. Besides, you have so much to do. Mr. Lincoln chuckled as he wrestled playfully with the boys. I'm never too tired or too busy to spend time with my sons. And he never was. No matter what problems he faced, no matter how busy or tired or worried he was, he found time for his boys. By the time Abraham Lincoln went to Washington, some of the southern states had withdrawn from the United States of America. The people in those states had set up a country of their own, the Confederate States of America. They were getting ready for the Civil War. The northern states were called the Union. Mr. Lincoln did not believe that the United States should be divided into two countries. The people in the Union agreed with him. The people in the Confederate States did not agree. About 6 weeks after Lincoln's inauguration, the war between the states began. President Lincoln hated the cruel war, but he believed liberty and union were worth fighting for. He believed the North and the South should be one nation. He also believed that all the people were important in any government. In one of his speeches, he said that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Abraham Lincoln worked long hours day and night during the war. There was no end to the problems he had to solve. Through it all, he found time to help many people. Every day, soldiers came to see him. Widows and mothers of soldiers came too. Widows are people whose husbands were killed. He always did everything that he could for them. Mr. Lincoln felt sorry for all the people who were hurt in the war. He felt sorry for their families. Even in these sad times, he went on telling jokes and stories. He tried to make people laugh. He knew that it was important to keep cheerful and to be good-natured. In the fall of 1864, Abraham Lincoln was elected president again. The war was still going on, but now it looked as if the Union would win. A few months later, President Lincoln made his second inauguration speech. He asked the people of the North and the South to forget their bitter feelings. He wanted them to work together to bind up the nation's wounds. In April 1865, the war finally ended. Once more, the flag of the United States was raised in the South as well as in the North. Mr. Lincoln was happy that the war was over. He was glad that the Union had been kept. He knew that there were still many problems ahead, but he was sure that they could all be worked out. Above all, he wanted the people in all parts of the country to be treated fairly. And here's a picture of him as president right after his second inauguration. One day, soon after the war ended, Mrs. Lincoln insisted that her husband go for a drive into the country with her. You are tired, Abe, she said. A drive will rest you, and the countryside is beautiful at this time of year. The president left the papers on his desk and went to the carriage. Together, he and his wife drove into the country. Abe laughed happily as he watched a robin fly into a tree with a long string in her bill. She's building a nest, Mary, he said, and we will build a new nation. The North and the South will be one nation, truly united. Mary Todd Lincoln smiled at her husband. She was thinking of the long road he had traveled from the backwoods to the White House. The little boy who had lived in a little log cabin in a little clearing on a little creek had become one of the greatest men that the world has ever known. So that's just a little bit about who he became and why we're going to read this story. And we read the last chapter first because we kind of want to set the stage for you. I want you to understand that Abe Lincoln was truly one of the greatest presidents this nation ever had. But I want you to understand why we're reading about him. So thanks for listening, and we'll do some more tomorrow. Bye.